So here we are in Photoshop. We've just exported our image from our raw processor as a smart object into Photoshop. Now, smart objects provide us with a couple of advantages. One of them is that we can double click on this layer at any time and it automatically opens up our raw processor. We can go back in, make adjustments and tweaks, hit OK, and it will update our image. The other advantage is that we can utilize the smart object and create smart filters. And smart filters are certain adjustments like shadow and highlights that in the past would have taken a pixel layer to do, which means that they were uneditable once you'd done them. To tweak them at all or change them, you'd have to throw them away and redo them. With a smart filter, you can go in and open them up at any point during the optimization process, make any type of adjustments you want, save it, and it updates the image. So before we begin here, I'm going to hit FF, clear the screen. I'm going to look at it and see if my pre-visualization that I did in my raw processor has changed at all. Doesn't look like it. We're kind of right on track here. I want to go in and open up the dark trees and the riverbank. I want to fix a couple of the bright blown out areas in the sky on the right. I think they tend to drag the eye of the viewer over that direction. I want to go in and get rid of that blue cast in the sky. And I want to probably accentuate the sunset a little bit more. It looks a little bit wimpy. So let's start. So now what we're going to do is we're going to deal with foundational issues. And these are large issues that we want to get rid of early on in the process. And these are things like alignment issues, shadow and highlights, noise reduction, basic cleanup, things like that. So first thing we're going to look at is whether our alignment is correct. I'm going to hit Command R, which brings up our rulers, drag down a guide. I'm going to go right down to where the water meets the bank, and it looks pretty good. So I'm going to put that back, hide that ruler with Command R. Now we're going to go into Image and Adjustments, Shadow and Highlights. I'm going to concentrate on the dark areas here. And the way that we do this is we give it too much amount, too much tone, and we're going to slide this radius up. And as you can see, there's going to be kind of a sweet spot where it really shows most of the contour or contrast within those dark tonal ranges. So I'm going to say that's going to work. Now in terms of the tone slider, we don't want to do the entire change of shadow detail. We want to actually go way on down here to probably about 5, which is going to really focus on the darker areas of the tree. And then in terms of amount, we're just going to slide that back and forth and see where it really works the best for us. Obviously, this is a little bit too much. So I'd say probably right in the 50 range is probably pretty good. Now we're going to go into our highlights. And I'm going to move this out of the way. This is an area that I want to bring down a little bit. I think it's a little bit too bright, and over here on the right-hand side. So we're going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to give it too much amount and too much tone. And now we're going to slide the radius slider until we can find a point where it really looks the best for what we're trying to accomplish. So I'd say that probably somewhere right around 160 is going to work. We're going to take our tone, take that down to maybe like 35 or so. And then I'm going to take this amount up to 60. I don't think it's going to do much past, let's look here. Yeah, maybe we can get up to 70 here. Now as I click this on or off, we can see we've opened up our shadows and we've knocked down those bright highlights up in the upper left-hand corner and in the right-hand side. So we've accomplished what we set out to do. All right, so we're going to leave all the settings here under adjustments, just leave them at 0. We're not going to screw around with those. And we're going to say OK. And you can see we've created a smart filter down here now. I'm going to throw away this unused mask. And as I mentioned, you can double click on this at any point and it will bring back the shadow and highlights options, and we can make a little tweak to it. So I'll show you how that works. There you go. I can make whatever tweak I wanted to do, hit OK, and it updates the file. All right, so next thing we're going to look for is we're going to look for noise. And yes, we do have noise. So I'm going to go up here to my filter, down here to ImageNomic, which is a third-party plugin that I use. There's a lot of really good noise reduction third-party plugins out there. Been using Noiseware for years now, and I like it a lot. I hear there are a whole new generation of noise reduction applications coming down the pike. I'm looking forward to it. They supposedly use a lot of artificial intelligence and really do an amazing job. So I'm looking forward to that. But in the meantime, I'm going to be using Noiseware. So I'm going to open this up a little bit here, and I'm going to blow this up to 400%, move down into the sky, and I think we've got some good noise reduction going on here. Now, it's important to understand that noise reduction is intelligent blurring. So when you do it, you have to kind of find that balance between too much blur and just enough to knock down the sense of the noise. What we can do is, after we run the noise reduction, there are several things I'll show you that we can do that will mitigate the softness and actually help get it back to looking pretty normal. So we're going to say OK here. This is the landscape preset. Works pretty well. All right, so now you can see that our Noiseware smart filter down here. Now I'm going to turn that off, and you can see the noise, and then we turn it on and the noise goes away. So I'm going to pull back here, and I'm going to see there's kind of a softness to it that I find a little disturbing now. So I'm going to try and get rid of that by doing a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to add in, holding down my Option key, a new layer, not an adjustment layer, a new layer, and I'm going to call that noise. And I'm going to put the blending mode of that into overlay, and I'm going to fill that with overlay neutral gray. And now I'm going to go up to, as you can see, number one, that this does nothing until we add noise to it. And then that noise pattern will affect what we see from the underlying layer. So I'll go back up here to my filter, back down to my third-party plugin, and I'm going to use what's called Real Grain. And this is a program that creates different styles of grain. And it has one here that I particularly like, which is called Digital Noise. It's very, very smooth, very, very consistent. I'm going to say OK. And it's now put it in. Let's go and look at it up here. OK, it looks a little aggressive. So I'm going to modify that by going into my channels here. And I'm going to go add to my red channel. I'm going to click on that, hold down my Command key and click on it. So now you can see we've made a selection of the luminance values in the red channel. And I'm going to then move back over to my layer, and I'm going to add a layer mask onto the noise. And I'm going to Command I to invert it. And if I now hold down my Option key and click on it, you can see this is what we're going to filter the noise with. So the wider areas are going to allow more noise through, and the less dark areas of grayscale all the way down to my black are going to slowly block out the noise. So we're really targeting the noise for the area that really needs it the most, which is the dark band across the middle of the image. All right, so let's now click that off. And I'm going to blow up an area to look at it, see how we're looking. Okay, here's before, and there's afterwards. It's still just a tad too aggressive. So I'm going to change the blend mode from overlay into soft light. And there, the whole thing just drops back an appropriate amount. I think it looks great now. Command 0 takes us back to full frame. The softness is still a little bit apparent, but it's definitely better now that we've added in some texture or some tooth to the image. Okay, so now we've done the shadow and highlights, the noise reduction. I now wanted to go in and get rid of these hot spots in the sky, these two here, and their corresponding reflections in the river. So to do that, I'm going to create a new layer above the noise layer by holding down my Option key, moving down to Merge Visible, and I've created what is called a composite layer or a stamp layer, and I'm going to give that a name of Content Aware because that's what I'm going to use it for. And I'm going to grab my lasso tool. Let's see, we got it. Okay. And I'm going to move up here to this area, and I'm going to kind of create a kind of a scalloped selection. If you scallop your selections, they tend to blend in a little bit better. So I always try and give it kind of an uneven edge. All right, so now I'm going to go to Shift F5, which is the shortcut for Content Aware. And I'm going to say OK. And there we go. And now I'm going to move down here and take care of this one. Same way, just create kind of a scalloped edge. And on down here. And around this here. And I go back to Shift F5, Content Aware. And now we move down to the reflection and the water here. And Shift F5, Content Aware. All right, now on this last one down here, I'm going to show you in the menu where, the main menu where the Content Aware fill exists. So in case you forget your shortcut, you'll know where to find it. So we're up here under Edit, down to Fill, and brings up Content Aware. Now the Fill dialog has a lot of different options, so just make sure that you select Content Aware and hit OK. All right, Command D to get rid of the selection. And now we're ready to go in and create what we call our global adjustments. So global adjustments are those luminosity, hue, and saturation adjustments that affect the entire image in a positive manner. So very often they're very minor little tweaks, especially if you've done the right type of work in your raw processor. All right, so to begin, we're going to go in and add in a temporary adjustment layer called Threshold, which is going to allow us to find the blackest point in our image. So I'm going to grab the center slider, move it all the way to the end of the visible black in the histogram, and I'm going to then pick one of the remaining black areas of black accumulation, and I'm going to blow that up, and we'll go right into here. And I'm going to then grab my sample tool. I'm going to go to an area of the black, hold down my Shift key and click. So now you can see I have a point number 1 in my info palette that represents the black of our image. So very often during the optimization process, you can inadvertently change the balance of colors in your black and add in very slight contamination of either red, green, or blue. And so this allows me to monitor my black point throughout the optimization process so I can see if anything has changed. All right, so now I'm going to sample that point, and to do that, I'm going to move over to my layers, and I'm going to hold down my Control key and click and delete layer. Now I'm going to hold down my Option key and go into my curves, and I'm going to create this first curve called Global Luminosity, GL, and move my blending mode down to luminosity. Now I'm going to move over here to my black dropper, which is the first dropper, and I'm going to double click on it just to make sure that we're still set to black, which we are. And I'm going to move over to this area, and I'm going to put this dropper in the center of that spot and click, and we've now created our black point. Now I can go grab my targeted adjustment tool and see if I can do anything up here by adding just a slight amount of contrast up here without affecting the opening up of the blacks that we've worked so hard to achieve in the trees and the riverbank. So I'm going to move that back up to make sure nothing's changed down there. So now we've created a little bit of contrast but left the trees and the riverbank out of it. So, all right, so now I'm going to move back on over to my layers, throw away this unused layer mask. I'm going to hold down my Option key. I'm going to click down here, and I'm going to go in and create a new curve. I'm going to call this one GC, and I'm going to change the blending mode to color. That way we will not affect the luminance adjustments that we just made. This will only have an effect on the hue and the saturation. So we're going to say OK here. I'm going to now go to my center dropper, and I'm going to double click on it, make sure that this reads 128, 128, 128, which is the definition of neutral gray. I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to move up here into this area that has this kind of a bluish cast to it. And I'm going to click. That did pretty good. No, that's not as good. Let's try this here. Nope. That looks pretty good. Let's turn this on or off. Yeah, there it is. There's the blue, and there it got rid of it. All right, so now we're going to move back to layers, and we're going to get rid of this layer mask. And we're going to search for a possible third global adjustment layer, and I think we can do that with hue saturation. So holding down my Option key, I go down and create a hue saturation, and I'll put the blend mode into color so that it only affect the hue or the saturation. And I'll say OK. Now I'm going to grab my targeted adjustment tool, and I'm going to go pick some of this kind of pinkish look here. Maybe it's best right over here. Click, it sees that as a yellow, so it's got to be a kind of a yellowish red. And I'm going to pull that up to like 25, and let's turn that on or off. Yeah, that looks good. That's lightened it up. It's kind of given a hint of the sunset coming in. We'll do a little bit more work on that in a second. So that's a positive change. So now we have to think about further things that need to be done to this image. And this is a good time to clear your screen. So we'll hit FF and look at your image and try and come up with an idea of what further adjustments need to be made. So what we're looking for here are areas of the image that need a little extra attention. And these are the regional adjustments, the luminosity, hue, and saturation adjustments that are restricted to a specific region of the image, usually through the use of a mask. So let's get back into our main Photoshop screen here. And we're going to decide on what is going to be our first regional adjustment. And I think that's going to be this whole center area here. I'd like to increase the saturation. I'd like to do a little bit of very low-end contrast, kind of open this area up in here a little bit. So to do that, we're going to need to select this area out. So I'm going to go to my last pixel layer, which is content aware. I'm going to move up here to color range. And we've got a very decent selection there. And to show you this, this is the default, which is this puny little preview. So I suggest that when you're using this tool that you go to your selection preview and move it down to quick mask, and then you'll be able to see on screen what you've selected and what you haven't selected. Now I've noticed that I've selected a lot down in the water here that I don't want, but I can deal with that once I make the selection. So I'll say OK. I'm going to now grab the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to hold down my Option key, which is going to turn it into a deselect tool. And come on across here, and I've deselected all those unwanted areas. Now I notice that there are what we call floaters here, and these are little areas that haven't been fully selected. So I'll show you a quick way of getting rid of them. We're going to go up here to Select, down to Modify, Expand. I'm going to expand by 5 pixels, which is appropriate for this situation. And then I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to contract by 5 pixels. So now we're back where we started, except we've now captured those little floaters and they're now part of the master selection. Okay, I'm going to move up to the top of my layer stack, and I'm going to create a group, and I'm going to add that selection onto the group as a mask. So this is now the area that we're going to be working with. Everything that you see that's white is where the adjustments are going to happen. So I'm going to hold down my Option key. I'm going to go in and create my first adjustment layer, which is going to be curves. And at this point, I'm going to leave it down here in luminosity. We'll be changing that in a minute, but that's where I want to start. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and add a little bit of open down here, openness. And so to do that, I'm going to pin down a couple of the points in the curve. And then I'm going to grab my targeted adjustment tool and try and find a kind of a light area that is going to allow me to pull it up a little bit. So we'll try down here. That's pretty good. I'm going to open that up. And now I'm going to go into kind of a darker area in here and pull that down. And let's see what we've got here. Yeah, we've definitely opened that up. Okay. Now, one thing that I don't like is we also have opened up these trees here. So what I'll probably do is go to this mask, grab my paintbrush, and I want to do this with a very soft brush and a flow of 100%, opacity of 100%. And we're going to, with our X key, going to switch the colors from white to black. And I'm going to go paint over these areas with pure black. And the reflections in the water also. They just started to look a little gray. So, and that was probably mostly because of the shadow and highlights command that we ran early on. But we can deal with that right now. And that should do it. If we hit our slash key, which is right under the delete key on the right-hand side of your keyboard, we can actually see where I've selected and where I haven't. So this gives me an opportunity to go in and do a little bit of, I'm going to get it smaller here, a little bit of cleanup here. Catch areas that I didn't catch in the first run. So it looks pretty good. So I'm going to hit that slash key again, turn them off. All right, so turning this on or off, and you can see that we've really affected the bank on a level that I wanted to. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to probably, let me look at the feather on there. They're plenty soft, so I don't need to feather those. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in and create, holding down my Option key, another adjustment layer of hue saturation. And I'm going to set the blend mode to color. Well, you know what? I think I may want to actually add some luminance to that green. So I'm going to leave it at normal, which means that this hue saturation is going to affect the hue, the saturation, and the luminance. So we can actually brighten that area up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to now grab my targeted adjustment tool. I'm going to move over where I see the most green, probably over in here. So I click, and it sees that as yellow, and I drag that to the right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to narrow the definition down here in our color range. This is the definition currently of yellow, so it goes well into the reds, all through the oranges. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this edge in here, really narrow. I'm going to narrow the center here. I'm going to bring this side in. So now I'll be able to slide this by grabbing it in the exact middle, and I can do that until I lose all of that kind of orange. So I've gotten rid of all that orange. We found that hot spot. And now I'm going to, let's see what happens if we add in or take out noise. We can add in a little bit of noise, lightness here. I'm going to move back over to my layer. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to add a couple points of blue into that green. And then we'll go back over to our layer, and I'm going to throw away this mask, and I'm going to reduce the opacity of that down to where it's kind of realistic. So I've now enhanced the green of the riverbanks, which works well. And I'm trying to think what else I could do here. Maybe what we could do is go back to my mask here, Command click on it, which will open up all of those spaces. And I'm going to inverse that selection. So now we just have these dark areas selected. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to add in another curve layer, holding down my Option key. And I'm going to take this down to luminosity, and I'll say OK. And I'll grab my targeted adjustment tool, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to look for the darkest spot. Let's go here. Let's actually go into where it looks pretty gray here and click and drag that down a little bit. Okay. And then bring this back up. Yeah, that helps. We can still see a little bit of contour or, information within those dark areas, but they feel a little bit more solid now. Okay, so now that we've done this, we can go back here. I'm going to close this up again. Now, I'm not going to feather this until I use the hard edge of it to help me create another mask, which is what I'm going to do next. We're going to try and emulate a little sense of sunset going on. So I'm going to start up here and move all the way across to the end of the sunset. Pull it down. It really doesn't matter how much of all of this we add in because we're going to get rid of that in a second. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to hit solid color, and I'm going to pick an appropriate sunset color, and we'll say that's okay. We can alter this when we get through working with it. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to Command T, which is a free transform. I'm going to grab this little cross here in the center, which is your pivot point, and I'm going to move it up to that corner. And I'm going to grab the upper left-hand corner. I'm just going to, oh, I can't do that. I got it before that, right-click, and tell it I want to distort. So I'm going to now move on down to about there, and I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to inverse the selection. So now everything but this part is selected. And I'm going to fill that with black. So I go to my system colors here and make black my background, and then Command X will cut to black everything but this area here. Okay, so that's what I wanted. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and go to the bottom mask here, hold down my Command key and click, and now I can move back up to the current mask that we're using, and I'm going to fill this area with black so that it will block out the effects of this sunset color from the trees and the riverbank and the darker areas. So I'm now going to go with this one targeted, and I'm going to hit Command X again, and that's going to cut to black. So we've now protected these areas here, and I'm going to go to my opacity, take it down to about 22, 20, somewhere around there. And now I'm going to feather this quite severely, maybe like up to 150. And then we're going to go back, and I'm going to probably increase a little bit to maybe 25. And let's look at that. Yeah, that works. All right, now I want to add a little bit of that color to some of these lighter places in the river. So I'm going to go grab my paintbrush with a very soft, and I'm going to move this down to probably 40, somewhere around there, and make sure that this is white. And I'm going to go into some of these areas and just let through a little bit of that color. And now if we turn this on and off, we can see the effect of what we've done. Now, one other thing that I'm looking at here is these look a little flat, these clouds. So I'm going to make a group here. I'm going to copy that into the group. I'm going to drag the mask right up to part of that group. Now, anything that goes inside this group now is going to be subject to this mask. So I'm now going to go in and add in a curve, and I'm going to put the blending mode of that curve into luminosity. Get rid of this unused mask. Open up my curve, and I'm going to grab my targeted adjustment tool, and I'm going to bring this part down a little bit, And I'm going to open up this part here a little bit, and then maybe even a little bit here. Yeah, that works. Maybe I want to back it off a little bit here, so I'll take this to maybe 70, somewhere around there. Yeah, that does it. Okay, so now it's time for the mid-tone contrast. Before I do that, I want to make sure that this mask has been feathered because it's pretty hard-edged, and that will be picked up by the tone contrast. So I'm going to double-click on that, and I'm going to take this up to probably 20, 25, somewhere around there. Let's go look at it now. Yeah, that looks pretty blurry, and it's still doing its job. Okay, so now going to the top of our layer stack, holding down our Option key, dropping down to Merge Visible, and we're now going to double click on that and call that MTC, which is mid-tone contrast. Then I'm going to double click on to the right of it, and I'm going to change the blend mode down here to overlay. Going to change the amount to 35 as a starting point. And then we're going to move down here to our underlying layer, and I'm going to move that up to about 70. Doesn't have to be spot on, but pretty close. And then take that down to about 50. And we're going to come up here to the highlights, move them down to 185. And then we're going to split by holding down the Option key, the right-hand side, and move that up to 205. So what's going to happen here is the final effect, which you haven't seen yet, is not going to be apparent at all in the shadows. It's blocked out of the shadows 100%. Now, when it gets up to about 50, it's going to start to let in some of the effect and get larger and larger until it's 100% at 70. And then it's going to go fully across the midtones of the image until it gets to 185, and then it's going to start to decline until it gets to 205, when it's going to be completely gone, and there's going to be none of that adjustments in the highlights. So nothing in the shadows and nothing in the highlights, concentrated on the midtones. So we'll say OK. Now we're going to go up to Filter, down to Other, and we're going to go to High Pass, and we're going to set this to 50. That's 50. We're going to say OK. And then we're going to go up to Image, Adjustments, down to Desaturate, and then over to Filter, and then down to Noise, and then over to Despeckle. And now we have our mid-tone contrast, and we can go in here, and you can see what it does. It goes and really enhances the separation between the mid-tone values. Okay? We're seeing nothing in the bright highlights or the shadows, but we're seeing a lot in the midtones. Now you can change that blend mode to soft light if it's too apparent. You can change the opacity, take that maybe up to 50. I usually find it works best between 20 and 40, but sometimes going into 50 can really make a difference. So here's under soft light. That actually looks pretty good. So we've now got our mid-tone contrast. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to do a vignette. And to do a vignette, we go up here and grab our elliptical marquee tool, make kind of an egg shape here. Then we're going to move up to Select, Transform Selection. We're going to grab the upper left-hand corner, move that to the upper left-hand corner of the image. Then we grab the bottom right-hand corner, move it to the bottom right-hand corner of the image. And then we say OK. And then we go Select, Inverse, which now reverses what we've selected. And we're now going to attach that to an adjustment level layer of curves, holding down my Option key. And we're going to go in here and make the blend mode multiply and say OK. So now we have the correct area dark and the correct area light, except it's much too dark and the edge is much too harsh. So what we're going to do is go to that layer, go to the mask, double click on it. We're going to then take the feather up to about 350, somewhere around there. Okay? Yeah, somewhere around there. That's close enough. Now what we're going to do is we're going to reduce this to not the density. We want to be the opacity. to about 35. And so this would be our vignette. It tends to force the observer's vision to the center of the image, which is kind of what you want to do with an image. You want that to be the part that you begin your exploration of the image. All right, so then we're going to go to the top, which is our vignette. I can actually name that vignette. And we're going to keep that selected, move down to the bottom, go to the layer just above your background, and hold down your Shift key and click, and then hit Command G, which means group, and it's now created a group, which I'm going to call RMH Optimization. And I can turn that on or off. There's where we started in Photoshop. There's where we ended in Photoshop. And if you want to go in and alter anything, you just need to open up that little group there, and there are all your adjustment layers. So at this point, all that's needed to be done is a little soft proof, a little output sharpening, and you're sending ink to paper. So good luck and enjoy your printing.